Welcome back everyone, and I hope you're all doing well. I'm here in this absolutely gorgeous spot that's actually between New York State and Massachusetts. We crossed the border of the states in this little walk to the waterfall. I came here a couple days ago and it was rainy and overcast and got some really great shots of the waterfall, but it was actually just like pouring rain for part of it, so I didn't really have time to explore any of this gorgeous area you see behind me. And what I noticed the last time I was here was that the sun sets right in line with this river. So I was thinking that I could come back, maybe explore some compositions, find some different shots here that would work as the sun is setting so the light's not as harsh like it is right now on my face, which is what we're gonna do to start off this episode. We'll probably end up at the waterfall as well, but I really think overcast light sells those kind of shots. Especially you'll see that it's very lush and full of forest and all this foliage and stuff like that, which that overcast light really helps with. But for now, we're gonna keep exploring this little river, see what we can find, and we're even gonna cross the state line, like I said, as we do this, I think it's less than a mile walk there and back. So, gonna continue on. That's how we're gonna start this episode. Thanks for joining along. Let's see what we can get up to. Composition I found is this really nice waterfall that cascades down through your shot. In the top left you have this little tiny waterfall that's kind of more of an accent piece, a waterfall in the middle and a big fall in the bottom right, but it's surrounded by some nice foliage in the top of the frame and that rock in the foliage in the bottom of the frame. And what I really like about it is there's no black spots, there's no dark areas, everything has something to look at. The foliage and the rock really surround the composition of the waterfall that leads your eye through the image. And I think overall it's a really nice shot. As you can tell, the light right now is kind of overcast. There's some storm clouds rolling through, which is giving me some nice soft light, so I'm shooting that. I'm also shooting when the light peers through, but it's really only hitting the foliage in the top, kind of creating some hot spots here and there. So I'm pretty sure it's gonna end up being the shot that has the more soft, dull light, because that's just gonna make all that foliage and everything look a little bit more balanced and stick out, those colors stick out as well. So that's the shot. I'm shooting at about 1/5 of a second because this water is moving pretty fast. And as you saw or are seeing now, I'm shooting handheld as well. I use my tripod for a few shots, but the shots that I like the most composition wise are kind of hanging over the ledge rather than trying to set up my tripod a little bit further back. I think that that's the shot that I'm gonna end up showing you. Regardless, here is my favorite shot from this moment. I'm gonna keep walking around and see if we can find anything else, hopefully before it starts raining. another really cool composition down here, but I couldn't really talk to you while I was shooting it. As you saw, it's pretty slippery, pretty precarious. I would not recommend trying to take that shot. I had to make sure my foot, I just put my foot down, but you can't see it. I had to make sure I put my foot on this spot that I could put all of my weight on. And then I was never letting go of my tripod because it was not holding up the camera. I was just holding on to it, taking a bracketed exposure, the middle exposure being about 1/5 of a second, and then one stop up and one stop down to try to recover some of the highlights that were happening up here when the sun was poking through. The composition is really pretty. The colors and the foliage and everything is just working in harmony right now, and I think it looks really good. And I really emphasize this pool of water spreading out in my image, which is why I wanted to cut out this as much as humanly possible. And I basically could extend as far as I could get my tripod out where it could still hold the camera enough to take those 3 exposures. So here's the image. This is probably the last image of the evening, but I'll include you along the way if I capture anything else. I hope you like it. And let's see where else we get with this video. Maybe I'll edit one of the photos in this video, and that'll wrap things up. Here it is. Thanks for watching. Thanks for tuning in. And as always, absolutely gorgeous here.
Wish I could leave without a trace. Yeah, yeah, alright.
All right, welcome to the studio. Let's dive into Lightroom and take a look at a few of the images from that evening at the waterfall. So I had options in terms of different lighting conditions, so I actually edited both of them. Here is the edit for the one that I ended up showing you at the end of the video just now, which is using the light at the top and some light at the bottom. Now, this is a fully luminosity masked image, plus I actually went in and used the new generative fill in Photoshop to generate some of this content, just a tiny bit of content down here to remove that rock. And here's the version that I did without Photoshop of the same image, just blended as an HDR. Now we're going to be working on this image, which is when the lighting was more uniform, it wasn't as direct, and I kind of just like the foliage more in this image. So I've already gone through and edited this entire image using both Photoshop and Lightroom. Usually my process in Photoshop is to take the images in and luminosity mask them, so I darken the top part of the image here, luminosity masked with a brighter shot down here, and then just did a few little adjustments of the water here and there. Nothing huge, but usually that's my workflow when I want more control over my image. But I thought it would be really fun to see if we can replicate doing basically exactly this without taking the images into Photoshop and only editing them directly in Lightroom. So that's what we're going to do. Now, before I do that, you're going to notice that I'm using an HDR image. I'm using 3 images that were bracketed at just -1, 0, and +1, like I said in the video. I could get away with just a single exposure. That's what this edit is right here. And you can see there's enough detail to recover in the shadows. I just wanted to use the brighter exposure here so that I could get slightly cleaner shadows. So what I did is I just combined them into an HDR, and that's what we're going to be working with. Everything else still applies. So if you ever take your own image like this, as long as you have all the data there, which we're about to check. Now, I'm going to be using my Lightroom editing companion throughout this edit, which you can find more info down below. It's this really cool thing that I've created that implements directly into Lightroom on the left-hand side here that look like presets. They do things that are preset-like, but you follow this companion guide that I have online that comes with it, and it kind of just teaches you a nice, solid workflow for editing when editing isn't really linear. It's really helpful, especially when you're starting out. I would give it a watch down below. If you're interested in that, you're going to kind of get to see how it works in this video. But for the most part, you can do all of this stuff without it if you want to follow exactly what I'm doing. But I really highly recommend you check it out because I do think it's pretty great for people that are beginning editing or even people that have been doing it for a long time. So let's get started. So the first thing I can do is check my black levels and check my highlights. And that's why I was saying we're using the HDR, because when I'm checking my black levels here, you can see how much detail we actually have in the shadows. Spot healing and stuff we're not going to do. We're going to do a quick little white balance reset. I want it to be a little bit warmer than it actually is, and actually a little bit greener than this. And then we're going to come over to our calibration and HSL fix. That's going to increase our calibration setting down here. I'm going to redden it up just a little bit, and I think that's looking pretty good already. So if I hit reset, that's all we've done, and the colors and stuff are looking a little bit better. I'm not going to do any tone curve adjustments or histogram adjustments right now. And the pre-crop is, I kind of already know, since I've already edited the image, that I'm going to want my crop to be about something like this. But we're not going to do that yet. We're just going to leave it large, and we'll crop at the end because I have an idea in mind. But I kind of want all of the image to be edited in case I ever go back and change that. Now, the first thing I'm going to want to do here is actually fix how bright the top part of the image is. Normally, I would come in here and use my sky balance mask, but there is no sky, even though this is doing a pretty good job. But it's not going to detect any sky in the image because there isn't one. We're actually going to do something a little bit different. We're going to come in here and create a linear gradient, select it down. This can be just a rough thing. And then we're going to be using an intersect mask. I'm going to be using those quite a few times here throughout this edit to kind of replicate what luminosity masking would be in Photoshop. So I'm just going to come in here to select luminance range. And then all I'm going to do is slide this. I'll hit show luminance so you guys can see it. Basically all the way over, and have this gradient all the way over as well. Maybe not fully right there, so that it's only selecting essentially the brightest parts of the image and then tailing off for the shadows. And the reason I'm doing that with a linear gradient is now my mask is basically this. So what all I'm going to do is come in here, decrease my exposure by a little bit, decrease the highlights to kind of balance the top part of the image with the bottom part of the image so it's not so bright. Now, if I turn off this luminance range, it's just subtly fixing and helping with the rocks over here on the right. If you can't tell, see how it's, when I turn the luminance range on, it's brightening up those shadows again. And when I turn it off, it's darkening that rock, which I don't want it to do. And this is basically just giving us more control to brighten that part of the image. Now, the next thing I'm going to want to do is come in here to my focus light mask. That's just going to create another big radial gradient here. I'm going to increase the size of it, and it's already pretty much in the spot we want it. So if I just turn that on and off, that's just brightening up the center part of our image. We're going to want to increase that by a little bit more. That's looking pretty good. And that means I'm going to come in here and decrease my exposure. And I think overall that's looking pretty good. All right, so the next thing I want to do is highlight little parts of the waterfall like I would using the luminosity masks in Photoshop. And to do that, I'm going to come over here to use my painted light mask. That is just going to come and create 3 different radial gradients in here that I need to alter and move around so that it's actually painting the areas that I want. I'm just going to come in here and do this pretty quickly. Let's elongate that. I really just want this to affect the waterfall here. And I'm going to turn this on and off. That's probably a little bit too hot. So I'm actually going to come in and decrease the highlights throughout the image a little bit. There we go. And maybe decrease the entire exposure a little bit. There we go. And come back in here. That can probably come up a little bit. Let's move our other one. I know that I want to highlight a little bit here of this waterfall. So this one can be a little bit more extreme. Let's bring the whites up so that's really only affecting the waterfall. And again, you could intersect this mask with a luminance mask so that it's either affecting only the shadows or only the waterfall. Water break. And so brighten that up just a little bit more. And now you can kind of see how it's affecting that little waterfall there. Let's go into another one and shape it to this area of the waterfall. Maybe a bit like that. I think that's looking pretty good. I think that looks really good. Okay, we're going to duplicate this mask so that we have more of them. I want one more up here, kind of going like this. That's just a little bit smaller. And probably not nearly as bright in the whites there. Okay, I think that's looking pretty good. Now, technically, you could have all of these in one mask, but then when you edit any of the settings over here, it's going to edit all of them at once. And I don't really like that because I want a little bit more control in my image. All right, so the next thing I want to do is brighten up some of the darker parts of the image here. So we're pretty much going to do exactly what we just did. We're going to paint some more radial filters in here. You could use a brush tool for this as well, but I usually find this is a little bit quicker. And what we're going to do is we're going to bring up the exposure here, but then we're going to intersect this mask with a luminance range just like we did before. And instead of choosing all of the highlights, we're going to choose all of the shadows. So we're basically going to do this. Come on now. There we go. And we're basically just going to affect only the shadows. We can bring that down a little bit. And there we go. So that's going to make it where it's not affecting any of the waterfall here, because if we turn off this luminance mask range now, you can see it affects too much of the waterfall there. And obviously I don't want it to affect this much. I'm not bringing it up by 3 stops. Just gonna little touches, just a little touch of bringing up the shadows there. So let's get out of that luminance range. Let's zoom in and go down there, and we can create another one, just a little small one here. And I'm not going to use a luminance range for this, and I'm actually going to bring up the whites right here, and then the exposure just a little bit. And it's adding just a little touch of light, just a tiny little touch, like that. And that's looking pretty good. All right, so next up, I'm going to create another one right here in this little dark area that I doubt I'm really going to get any detail out of, but I want to add a little bit back in. And for this one, I'm just going to bring up the shadows, bring up the exposure just a little bit. And it's adding a little bit back in, just a little touch of light. It's not super effective, but it's adding just enough to get some detail there. Maybe I don't want to bring the exposure up that much. I want to leave the shadows. And we're going to actually just replicate this mask by duplicating it, coming in here. And I'm going to add a little bit back in, but I'm going to only affect the shadows. So I want this one to only brighten up the shadows right here. And I think that's looking pretty good. So you can tell what this is doing on and off there. I think that's looking really great. So here's our starting image, and here's where we're at now. And this is looking really, really great. So now that I've kind of painted in some of my light, I can tell that it's a little bit too bright here. So once again, I'm going to kind of bring the exposure of the entire image down watching my histogram and get a good idea of where that's looking. And I'm going to come back in here, and we're going to go back to our focus light mask, and I'm going to bring up the exposure of the whole image by a little bit. And we're kind of just massaging that back and forth. Like I said, I'm not using my entire Lightroom editing companion here. We're using some parts of it, and those things will teach you the other parts that I'm using. So for example, I used my painted light mask to paint in the light on this waterfall, and then we applied that exact same concept to paint in the areas of the shadows. And you can do this with a lot of images, and it teaches you a lot of these elements, and it kind of makes you think outside the box for some of the tools in Lightroom that you may have not used them for. All right, so the next thing I'm going to apply is my little soft punch preset here. That's just going to decrease the dehaze, or increase the dehaze and decrease the clarity. I'm going to bring the saturation of the whole image down. And the next thing is I'm going to come down here and add a little contrast back into the image. It's going to darken the image probably a little bit too much. And we're going to massage that back up by bringing up the shadows. We're actually going to go in here to our focus light and bring up the shadows in this mask so that it's affecting more of the bottom part of the image rather than the top part of the image. And I think that's looking pretty good. Overall, I think our image is getting pretty close. It can probably be brightened up a little bit, and maybe the highlights being brought back down. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. I still think the highlights in the top are a little bit too hot. So I'm going to create another linear gradient by pressing M, bring it down on the whole image, and I'm only going to bring down the highlights a little bit. I still think that middle part is a bit too strong. So let's go to where our painted light there is and bring that whites off of there. Yeah, that's looking good. Okay, so let's crop our image down to what it was before, which is something along these lines. I don't know the exact crop. And I think that's looking pretty great from where we started. Now let's take a look at our image that we created in Photoshop using luminosity masks. Let's go back to its crop that we had before. And I think overall, this one could be a little bit brighter to match it. Overall, these are looking similarly close, and we didn't even take it outside of Lightroom. I think that's pretty cool to do. Now, I would spend more time on this if I wasn't trying to film this and talk and go as fast as I'm going so that I save you time. And I would go back and forth on the little things like maybe brightening up this little waterfall here again. I think it's important to take the time with these things, step away. And like I said, Lightroom Editing Companion down below will help learn those things, teach them to you. They're reminded over here on the left side where we would do a final crop, which is what we just did. Kind of fix your colors, which I haven't even done yet, but I think overall the colors are looking pretty good in here. I may mix the greens a little bit because that's basically the entire color of the image. I would come in here, and it even reminds you to step away and reset your eyes, which obviously I've already done editing this image, and I would let it sit there for a little bit. Anyways, that's going to wrap up this video. I hope you enjoyed both the taking the photo and editing segment. As always, you can like the video if you liked it. Consider subscribing if you loved it. There's got to be some rainbows out there somewhere. Just got to go find them later. All right. That battery's almost dead.